Okay, guys, good morning. Welcome back. Hope you guys have been having a good couple of days since we all saw each other on Monday. But anyway, we got about 5 minutes, then we'll get underway for today. Appreciate you guys' attendance as usual. Yeah, so rise and shine. I'll be with you guys in just a few. Hi, Grant. Yeah, been pretty good. Just preparing my notes, have my grading assignments that I'm working on for some other courses. Following the news a lot. I'm a big time information addict, so I'm always watching whatever's happening, looking at the impeachment trial. Yeah, not too bad. I've been doing some running every day a little bit. So not too bad. I can't wait for the weather to turn a little bit, get a bit warmer. It's not too bad, but for a California guy like me, I really like it when it's up in those 70-degree range or whatever, so hopefully we get there soon. It's nice for the running. Hi, Dimitri, good to see you. Yeah, because usually I teach pretty much Monday through Thursday till 3:45, and then it takes a little while to get out there to the track where I go run. It's kind of a big public track nearby, and it's easy to go there, not too many people around. But it's usually kind of cold by the time I reach the track at like 5:30 or 5. So, plus with our daylight savings time, I'll be happy when they spring forward an hour so we get a little more light. Hi, Ryan, good to see you. Okay, just got about 3 minutes to go, and then we'll get things started. Well, interesting question, Ryan. I guess I usually, in my own experience, would just always do it by the date, and I would just have that as the heading of my note. Here are the dates for that, here are the notes for that day. But you seem even maybe more organized than me. I like your suggestion. I mean, if you do it by either lecture or by unit, these are two fine ways to do it. Unit is pretty big, though. I mean, because a whole unit of the course is like three weeks in many cases. So you wouldn't be able to draw as many distinctions as you would if you had it by individual lecture. So maybe in my mind, I would think lecture, just going off of top of my head. But it's fine either way, pretty much. Yeah. Hi, Abraham. Thank you. I'm sorry, just the way it looks from this distance, Julia, Kylie, Ryan. Once again, Ryan, good to see you. Abby, okay, I got it. Thank you. Okay, you guys slept pretty good. I don't know if you guys are the early morning folks or not. Probably, though, if you signed up for a 9 a.m. class. I don't know. Hi, Finn. Good to see you, too. Hi, Nicole, Louise, Alex. Okay, just about another minute here. Hi, Elif. Sloan. Hi, Connor, Drew. Once again, good to see you guys. Okay, well, here it is. It's 9 a.m. So thanks again, everyone. I really do appreciate your attendance and all of your participation with the lectures. So let's just kind of resume where we were at. We're still working through the topic of philosophy of religion, obviously, and we have just a little more material, a couple more arguments to review. So we were in the middle of going over the cosmological argument last time, so I want to kind of finish discussing that with you guys, and then from there we will go through the notes on the argument from design, another powerful argument for God's existence. So it's good to see everybody. I see you guys here in the chat. If you haven't had a chance, just do say hello or good morning in the chat, and that way I know that you made it to the meeting. Okay, great, sounds good. So let's just go back over these little notes from Monday one more time. The ontological argument, we've pretty much dealt with that, I think, in pretty good depth. That was the argument based on the definition of God as the greatest conceivable being, and the implication is supposed to be that if you're defined as the greatest conceivable being, then you'd have to exist in the mind and in reality, because that's greater than mere existence in the mind. And we heard all the different objections to this, whether it was Ganilo saying the lost island clearly doesn't exist, but based on the definition I gave it, wouldn't Anselm imply that it does, which is absurd. G.E. Moore, existence is not a predicate. William Rowe, you can't just define something as existing and then consider that to be a sufficient proof that it does. If so, we could just make up a word like unican or magican and stipulate that because it says existing such and such that thing has to exist. Clearly that's not so. Okay, and then now we're at the cosmological argument. So in the previous meeting, I think I had talked to you guys about a few points within Richard Taylor's presentation. So he starts with this hypothetical scenario of someone who finds a sphere, who stumbles upon a big sphere in the woods. And the reason he uses this odd, admittedly unusual example is because it's unusual. He says if you saw something weird like that, then you would probably ask a question: how did it get there? What's the reason for it to be there? How did that, originate? What's the backstory on the sphere that's in the woods? That's strange. But quickly he switches our focus from that example to the more general insight that whether it is an unusual thing or a commonplace item in a normal place, whether it's either case, it's still something that has to have an origin ultimately, because nothing can just happen or exist without having been caused to exist by something else. So this leads us, if you guys remember, to the principle of sufficient reason. And the principle of sufficient reason, does anybody have a sense of what that one said? Just let me hear it in the chat. Just touching base with you guys on this cosmological argument information. So yeah, it was the principle of sufficient reason, which was the whole real point of him laying out this sphere thought experiment. Let me know if you have a kind of summary statement of it. Drew, whenever something's true, there must be an explanation or reason for it. And yes, that means there's a cause or an explanation for any fact. Great, yes, that's basically it. When something is true, there has to be a cause. Ryan, you put consequence of initial reflections. Yes, well, I mean, that is the sort of order of presentation of his article. Like, the principle of sufficient reason is what he thinks we will infer on the basis of his examples. But what it is in general, yes, a cause or an explanation must exist for any fact. Alex, one little small correction. You wrote in the case of any positive proof. Actually, the word would be truth. In the case of any positive truth, there must be a sufficient reason for it. Positive truth just means something that does exist. And we told you guys that a negative truth, on the other hand, is something that, like a statement that something does not exist. Those, the principle of sufficient reason does not apply to, but positive truths do. Okay, so I think that brings us back up to where we were. Now I want to continue through the discussion of the cosmological argument. There's a few more important points that we have to clarify. So this is still our topic for now. The cosmological argument is still our subject matter, and you guys know that the author is Richard Taylor, American philosopher of the 20th and slightly 21st century. His discussion of cosmological argument traces from 1963, but I told you guys that it's actually a much more ancient argument than that. This argument spans back thousands of years. Nonetheless, we have commentators that discuss and report on it in every different generation. So Richard Taylor is just kind of a more modern commentator, explainer of the ancient classic cosmological argument. Okay, so next point about his presentation is this. We all understand the principle of sufficient reason now. The next thing to consider is that there are two different types of truths, okay? Two types of truths. Okay, so here's some terminology we want to know. One type of truth is what are called contingent truths. On the other hand, we've got what are called necessary truths. Okay, so first off, contingent truths. The definition is these are things that are true, okay, but they didn't need to be true. They could have been false. They could have been false if things had played out differently, if the circumstances had been slightly different or whatever. So these are things that are true, but could have been false in different circumstances, like than the actual ones that happened. So, okay, now we're going to hold off on this description for a minute because I want us to all think about and discuss this contingent truths. Okay, so you can see the definition, and it says there are things that are true, so they are true, but they could have been false. You can imagine a contrary to fact scenario where it wouldn't have happened, and instead of being true, it would have been false. So I could throw out a billion different examples to you guys, but I would like to see if maybe you can throw some at me first, and then I'll evaluate what you suggest, and we'll all have a clear understanding. We'll be on the same page. So who thinks they could make a quick assessment of what would be an example of a contingent truth? So think of something that's true. It's like true in our world, but could have played out differently, at least possibly. So it was possible for it not to have happened. What do you think? And here's a hint. There's infinity of examples. It's just almost everything. But okay, so Ellie, good example to start with. You're all in this class. Okay, so speaking for the members of the class, you guys are enrolled in the class. But sure, you could have, I guess, made a different decision about your schedule, right? You could have said, I don't want to take philosophy this semester, or maybe I would like to take a different course instead. Or maybe, God forbid, something could have prevented you from even taking any courses this semester, so, but nonetheless, here you are, and I'm very happy that you're here in this class. Okay, you go to Chapman. Another example, that's a good example, Drew. You're at Chapman as a student. You're a Chapman University student, but I guess it's possible that you might have gone to a different college. Maybe you got other offers and you chose to go to this one. Maybe you might have chosen not to go to college at all. Or maybe you might have taken on an injury or something that would have stood in the way of your continued pursuit of education. I'm glad that you're here, but it might not have happened. Okay, so these are great examples. Flipping a coin. Another cool example, Dimitri, when it lands heads, or tails, for example, that's the face that shows. But obviously, had the conditions of the coin flip been slightly different, then maybe other face would have shown instead. JFK's death, another good example, going back a little ways into history. We all know that JFK was assassinated, but if slightly different factors had come to play, then maybe he would have not been assassinated on that day. Maybe the attempt would have failed, maybe the shot would have missed, etc. Maybe the other person, his gun could have jammed, or he would have had a last-second moment of mercy. School being online, another cool example, Brian. Yeah, so we are online, and you can clearly see that right now, and that's because of the pandemic outbreak. But maybe had the outbreak not been so widespread or mitigated better, or even a more far-fetched possibility, never having arisen in the first place by whatever pathogenic origins that it had, then maybe we would still be doing business as normal. So good. These are all correct and fair examples of contingent truths. And the list, of course, doesn't stop there. We could mention any, event in history, the Capitol riot, maybe that might not have happened had things happened differently. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers won the Super Bowl on the weekend, and maybe had the offensive line of the Chiefs been more prepared, maybe that wouldn't have happened. So good examples all around, guys. I mean, even your own birth, that's a trippy example, but here you are and you exist. But if your parents hadn't met way in the past or whenever, then I guess that might not have happened either. So contingent truths. Hopefully now it's coming into focus. These are things that are true, but they are contingent because they could have happened otherwise. Now, the principle of sufficient reason that we guys all talked about, which says that if something is true, then it has to have had a cause or an explanation. It applies directly to the contingent truths. Contingent truths depend on something else for their having happened, right? So if it didn't need to happen, and it might have played out differently, then there has to be some kind of set of factors that does explain why it happened in that way, right? Since you were born, and that's something that might not have happened, then there has to be some kind of set of factors that your existence depends on, such that had those events not happened, you wouldn't have existed. And that's how it is with every contingent truth. They're dependent truths. They are contingent, meaning that they depend on something else happening for them to occur. Okay? Now let's move to the other category of truths. So these are necessary truths. Necessary truths, much different. So these are truths that are true, but they could not possibly be false. So it's not even possible to imagine them being false in any scenario. So things that are true and could not possibly be false. Okay, so I don't know. Let's see if anyone can attempt an example of necessary truth. I think it's a little bit trickier. Maybe it's a little more abstract, harder to conceive of at first. So it's okay if we have a couple of bumps along the road as we try to get these examples out there. But who thinks they could mention something that sounds like a truth that has absolutely zero potential of being false? Let me think. Maybe you got to think a little outside the box, because most everything, facts of the world are contingent. So Nicole, you say the Earth is a sphere. Yeah, it is a sphere, and I know that it's a sphere due to forces of nature and physics that cause matter to accrete into a spherical shape in the void of space. But I guess, and this is way far-fetched, but some say that had the initial inflation of matter from the Big Bang differed in the expansion rate by even just a small amount, then there could have been wildly different physical laws. And under those alternative set of physical laws, maybe matter wouldn't have accumulated into a sphere in the void of space. So it's a good example because it has to do with very, very deeply rooted truths like the laws of physics. But some say that even those aspects of cosmology could be slightly different in a very much different scenario of the universe. Water falls downward. It's kind of the same thing about gravity, right? But gravitational forces and such could also be, at least in theory, imagined different in a different possible universe. My glasses are black. Well, this is 100% not a necessary truth, because the glasses that I'm wearing being black, I could have decided to buy a different shade or color of glasses. This is not necessary truth. It's something that I chose to do, but had I made a different decision, I'd be sitting here with no glasses on or with a different color. Ryan, humans can't survive without oxygen. True, that's true, but we can imagine having evolved on this planet with much different set of environmental factors, such that we would subsist on, I don't know, a different type of element within the periodic tables or compound. Now, Ellie, you're getting, I think, something that is right on the right track, okay? You say 2 is an even number. And so this is the kind of stuff that does qualify for being a necessary truth. All statements of truth within mathematics, geometry, trigonometry, logic, those kind of formal truths, like 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 4 is not something that depends on the circumstances. Like sometimes when the weather is right, 2 + 2 = 4. And then on other days, it just isn't the same. No, it's a fact that doesn't have anything to do with the particular circumstances of space and time. So formal facts from the what we sometimes call the formal sciences of math, logic, geometry, and stuff. Like there are three sides to a triangle. The interior angles of the triangle amount to 180 degrees. The points lying on the perimeter of a circle are all equally distant from its center. These are all truths that don't depend on anything except for the nature of mathematics and geometry, etc. So when you think of necessary truths, think of things like that. Anything that's within the realm of space and time has at least some far-fetched potential to have happened differently. Okay, so now that we've got that concept on the table, we can just return to our discussion here. The author, Taylor, is telling us that there are two different types of truths. There's contingent truths that could have happened differently, they could have been false. And then there are necessary truths like math and geometry and all that stuff. And those are things that have no possible way of being false. Now, the contingent truths, we said, the principle of sufficient reason holds that with respect to them, there must be a cause or an explanation, which shows why they happened instead of not happening. So now we move to the next part of this discussion. We're almost to the end. So after going over the two types of truth, the next mentioned concept is this, that one thing that's true, and we all can agree on this, is that the universe exists. So here's a fact. The universe, or some call it the cosmos, exists. This is something that nobody can deny. I mean, how could a person think there's no universe? If so, then how could you even exist? Obviously, you're a part of a system that's larger than you. So we all know there's a universe. Here's the next question to consider. Based on what we've learned about contingent and necessary truths, what would you say this truth is? The existence of the universe, the fact that it's there, the fact that the whole universe exists. Would you say this is contingent or necessary? Or, I mean, what do you think is the judgment of the author? Let me see what you think, because this is going to advance the argument to the next stage. Okay, good, Nicole, contingent. And I don't know if that's the sort of consensus of many, but that's what he thinks is eminently obvious, that it has to be a contingent truth. This universe existing is contingent, meaning that although the universe exists, it's possible to consider a situation where it didn't ever exist in the first place. And I think that's something that whether you are a believer in God and religion, or if you're more of a secular person who just follows science, either way you go, it does look like the universe is contingent, because the scientific account is the Big Bang. But according to that account, the Big Bang happened at a certain moment in time, and so had the Big Bang not occurred, then there wouldn't have been a universe. If you're a believer in God and religion, then your hypothesis would be creationism. And if it's God's creation that causes the universe, then once again, God could have chosen not to have made the divine act of creation. In case he didn't, then there wouldn't have been a universe. If he didn't say, let there be light, and etc., then there wouldn't have been the universe. So it seems like we can all pretty much well agree that the universe is contingent. He offers some additional reasoning, though, to make it even clearer if it wasn't already. He says one other reason to think that it's contingent is because every particular thing in the universe is contingent. So every individual thing is contingent. So if each piece is, then wouldn't the whole be as well? If all the parts are contingent, so should the whole be. And that seems true. I'm contingent, you're contingent. The fact that this class is happening is contingent. The fact that this planet Earth even formed and existed seems to be contingent. And as we bring the scope outward and look at the bigger and bigger picture, the existence of the Milky Way galaxy, galaxy superclusters, and then the whole universe, it just seems like the whole universe should be contingent if every particular event and object within it is too. Okay, so let me take you back through our steps, and then we'll move on to the next part of the argument. He starts with the sphere example. He says, if you saw a sphere or something weird like that in an unusual place, it would trigger these thoughts of how did it get there, what is the explanation or cause? And he uses that kind of intuition to promote and convince us of the principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason just generalizes off of the sphere example, and it says that whenever anything exists, whether usual or unusual, any positively existing thing had to have an explanation or a cause. Okay, so then we are made aware of the contingent and necessary truth distinction, and then the point is made that the universe existing is contingent. So if the universe is contingent, what does the principle of sufficient reason say about it? If this universe is a big contingent truth, then according to the principle of sufficient reason, it has to have what? Let me see. Principle of sufficient reason, applying that to our current fact, we reach the conclusion that there must be what? Yes, there must be a cause or an explanation for the existence of the whole universe. Just as much as there must be a cause or explanation for my existence, for your existence, for your computer's existence, the universe being something that's contingent, just as much as these other specific examples must have a cause or an explanation. Okay, so then we now have to ask the biggest question of all. What then could possibly be the cause of the whole universe? This is a different type of question than asking what's the cause of something in the universe. Because for something in the universe, you would find another part of the universe to cause it. Like my existence and yours depends on our parents, which are other things. But when you ask what's the cause of the whole universe, then you can't just refer to something within it. Or let me explain that. So suppose this here circle that I'm drawing is just a diagram that stands for the universe. So I put the letter U there. One question. Could something that is inside of or a part of the universe cause the universe to exist? Like, I'm essentially asking you, and think about it logically, could the universe bring itself into existence? Could the universe cause itself to exist? What do you think about that? Let me know what you think is my answer for this question. Could the universe cause its own existence? That's our first question to ponder as we start thinking about the ultimate origin of the universe. Could the universe be its own cause? Okay, Grant, no. Alex, no. And that's correct. At least it seems to be logically. But let me ask you guys to expand on the point just a bit. Why does it seem common sense and reasonable to say that the universe cannot cause itself? What's the reason that that's just absurd or just logically contradictory for the universe to cause itself? Why is it that you say no? Because that's the right answer, but I'm asking you to maybe go over it a little bit more. Okay, Patrick, yes, it's like giving birth to yourself, and as you can understand, that is just a complete absurdity and a contradiction in terms. If something causes itself, okay, that would mean that it already exists prior to the cause. But this makes no sense because we're trying to explain the reason that this thing exists since it's the effect of some cause. So it cannot be both the cause and the effect of itself. If somebody gave birth to themselves, don't you understand that this makes absolutely no sense? Because the thing which is birthed is supposed to be them. So they can't already pre-exist and precede the thing which they are in order to cause it to exist. Okay? So obviously then, that is a non-starter. That option won't work. So we cannot have this type of scenario where something of the universe is the cause of the universe. That does not make sense because once again, it would have to precede the existence of the universe in time in order for it to be capable of causing that thing to exist. So that's not possible. So we have another possibility then to consider other than that. If it's not possible for something that is within or part of the universe to cause the universe, because that which we are trying to explain is the existence of the universe, so we cannot presuppose its existence as the cause. Maybe then the only possibility is that it is something outside of and separate from the universe. That makes better sense because if it's different from the universe, then it can cause that thing to exist. If it were part of the universe, then it's part of what is to be explained, and it can't be the effective cause. So if this is our universe diagram, then it seems that the cause has to be something from outside. And this is like an arrow of causation, pointing from the cause to this, the effect. Now, suppose that the cause of the universe is something contingent. So I'm labeling it with the letter C. All right? Now I have another question for you guys. Could the cause of the universe be some contingent being? Like another thing that is dependent on something? What do you think is the answer for this? Could the cause of our universe be something else which is itself contingent as well? Let me know what you think. Now, Amanda, you saying yes. Well, I'm sorry to say there's actually an issue with the yes answer. let's think through a little bit. Drew, and you're saying no. Ryan, you're saying yes. So we kind of have diversity of responses here. But the correct answer, just going to be blunt about it, is no. No, it can't be that there's a contingent thing that causes the universe. And exactly, Drew, the reason is what you're mentioning. Because if this thing that causes the universe is contingent, then because it is contingent, it cannot be something that exists on its own. It's something that depends on something else for its existence. So if the cause of the universe is something outside of it that's contingent, then in that case, it has to have a cause as well. And if the cause of the cause is contingent, again, then this would have to have a further cause. And so what this leads to is an infinite regress, an infinite sequence of causes that goes back to back to back to infinity and never has an origin. But that's considered to be impossible. An infinite regress is impossible because it doesn't really explain why the whole sequence of events exists in the first place. It just kind of kicks the can down the road to the next contingent being in the sequence, but it never grounds the whole series with something that's at the beginning. Let's make this clear, guys. Could the first cause of everything be contingent? Well, no, because if it was contingent, it wouldn't be the first thing. Contingent things depend on prior causes for their existence. So, if the universe is caused by something that depends on other things, which is caused by something that depends on other things, going back and back and back into infinity, we would never get to the ultimate source of all the causation. And therefore, this is also something that does not have a possibility of being true. So we've got two suggestions that have both been rejected. Number one, that the universe somehow could cause itself, not possible. Number two, that something which is contingent could be the old beginning of the series. So there's only one remaining option, and this is the one that he thinks does make sense, and this is why he concludes that there has to be a God. Instead of it being that the universe is caused by something which is contingent, the cause that creates or leads to the existence of the universe must not be contingent, so instead it has to be something that's what? What do you think is the terminology I'm fishing around for here? Because we say the cause can't be contingent, okay? Because then it would lead us to this infinite regress, which just goes nowhere. So correct, Patrick and Ryan and the others. The cause of the universe has to be a necessary being. Therefore, I label it with the letter N. Now, if the cause of the universe is a necessary being, a necessary truth, then that means whatever this cause is something that does not depend on anything else for its existence. It just exists independently. And it's something that exists and could not possibly not exist. So that is the only way to stop the causal story from just becoming infinitely regressive. Only if at the beginning of the whole sequence is there something that does not depend on anything else can we thus explain the existence of all the other things that do depend on it. So the picture then is that the universe is contingent. The principle of sufficient reason says it therefore has to have a cause. And when you question what could the cause of the whole universe be, there's not too many possible options according to the author's argument. Number one, it can't be that the universe causes itself because that's a straight contradiction. And it also, he argues, can't be that something contingent is the cause of the universe because anything contingent would depend on further things for its own existence. And that would lead us nowhere towards the beginning of the sequence. So wherever the causal story terminates and reaches the first link in this chain of causation, that first member has to be something that doesn't have any prior causes behind it. And that being, the necessary being here, is just thought of as God, the creator from which everything comes, but whom has no cause himself, and is therefore just ultimate and exists with no cause. Amanda, you say, if there has to be a first cause, then how do we know it's not the universe itself or the creator's creator? Why do we stop there? Well, okay, good question, Amanda. If there's a first cause, I guess what you're saying is, couldn't the universe just be the necessary being that doesn't stand in need of a cause? So why assume that this universe even has this external factor that brings it into being, and just assume that its ultimate exists with no cause, and the universe just is the necessary being itself? Is that your first kind of question? Well, if I understand it that way, here's what I think that Taylor and other followers of the argument would say. They would say that the universe does not seem to be necessary, though, because everything inside of the universe comes into being and then perishes. Whether it's a star, a planet, a human life, or anything larger or smaller than those examples, things have a limited span in time. And so he says all of our experience of things within the universe shows that they come and go, that they come into being and then they pass out of being. So if that's the general pattern, and entropy is like a physical property of the universe, matter tends to become less organized over time and dissipate and all of that. It looks that the universe and all the items of the universe are themselves contingent. And so he would just insist that it seems like the whole should have the same qualities as the parts. Now, the second question, how do you know it's not the creator's creator? Well, maybe it is, but whatever the first creator is of all the other creators, that's God, okay? So like imagine that right now, the universe that you're in is the creation of like super smart scientists in like another dimension, okay? So they're the creator of this universe. But those super smart scientists in this other dimension depend on something for their existence. And so whatever is the ultimate source of everything has to be something which does not depend on other things. So it could be a creator's creator, but there has to be a first one. And the first one is God, which is different from all the others, because God, unlike the others, is necessary, and all the others below are contingent. Okay? So, I mean, that's my best explanation for your question, but it's a good question. There's like a show, I don't know if you guys ever watched Rick and Morty. It's like a funny, cartoon, and it's pretty hilarious. Anyway, one of the characters, Rick, he's this like mad scientist guy who constantly goes on adventures and creates all kinds of like inventions and stuff. In one episode, he, I think, builds a universe, and relative to that universe, they think of like Rick as pretty much like the creator God. But there's like this sequence of different Ricks in these other versions of the universe. So like one Rick creates the other, creates the other, creates the other, like one of those Russian dolls that has stacked up dolls within it. Anyway, though, the point is that they couldn't just be Ricks to infinity. There'd have to ultimately be something that creates those things that doesn't depend on anything else. I don't know if this is at all helpful as a reference, but it's relevant indirectly to the argument, okay? So there we go. That's it. The universe has to exist because the universe has to have, God has to exist because the universe does. And since the universe has a cause, the only possible cause that it could have is something that's not contingent, because a contingent thing cannot be the first member of a series of events. And if there is no necessary being at the beginning of the causal story, then we have an infinite regress, which just doesn't really make sense at all. So that's how he concludes. Let me read a little bit from his words, and then we'll move to the next author. So he said, from the principle of sufficient reason, it follows that there must be a reason not only for the existence of everything in the universe, but for the universe itself. Everything, meaning by the world, he sometimes uses the phrase the world, but he doesn't just mean the earth. Meaning by world, everything that exists except God. The principle doesn't imply that there must be a purpose or goal, rather just that there has to be a cause or explanation. It would be odd to maintain that everything in the universe has an explanation or cause, but that the universe as a whole does not. And so going on a little bit further, he says, yeah, so kind of also touching on your point, Amanda, he says here on page 28, it seems, if, as seems implied by the principle of sufficient reason, there must be a cause for the existence of the universe, then that reason must be found either in the universe itself or outside of it, in something that is either within or without the universe. Now, if we think that the universe contains within itself the reason for its existence, then we would be saying it's a necessary being. In that case, there would be no reason for saying that it depends on anything else for its existence. But this is implausible because we find nothing about the universe in it to suggest that it exists by its own nature. On the contrary, we find so many things to suggest that it does not, because everything that exists by its very nature would be necessarily eternal and indestructible. It would be a self-contradiction to say of anything that it exists on its own, and at the same time that it comes into being or passes away. Nothing about the universe seems like this, because considering anything in it, we can perfectly think of it as being annihilated or as never having existed in the first place. Some things are very old, the moon, the stars, the planets, but it's still possible to imagine that they will someday not exist and at some prior date did not exist. So this is further evidence that each thing in the universe is contingent. And he says, finally, it would seem then that the universe is contingent and depends on something other than itself for its existence. And it must depend on something because otherwise there would be no reason why it exists. So now, that upon which the universe depends must be something that either is necessary or contingent. If it does not exist on its own, if it's not necessary, then it would depend on something else, and on and on. Now, this could go on to infinity, or we could have a necessary being that establishes the existence of all the other things. The infinite regress, however, is not possible because it doesn't give a reason for why it all exists in the first place. So ultimately, then, it would seem that the universe, in case it exists, must depend on something that is necessary and that cannot perish, which is eternal, and that would be God. Okay, so now, Grant, you've asked, does this argument claim that the Big Bang is contingent and therefore proves the existence of God? Well, I believe that the argument takes no position as to whether the Big Bang happened or not, because if it did happen, then I guess this argument would say it's a contingent event that was chosen by the necessary being to happen. So like some necessary being initiates the contingent sequence of events starting with the Big Bang. Now, if you're not a believer in the Big Bang per se, then you could still just say God's the creator and he said, let there be light and such, and the universe came into being that way. But in either case, it doesn't really pose a problem for his argument because God can be that which initiates the Big Bang, or in a more traditional religious way of looking at it, maybe his act of creation doesn't look like a Big Bang, but it's still caused by God. Okay, so good question there. All right, guys, so I think then that is enough for now on the cosmological argument. We'll come back to all these different arguments over time and kind of discuss them at various points later, but now we have to move to the next author. So we've got a new argument for God's existence that we're now going to try and at least start with. And this argument is called the argument from design. Also, just a quick side note, I'm gonna distribute the prompt for the first essays, not this week, but on Monday, and then you'll have 2 weeks to work on them from there. So just kind of keeping your head in the game with the dates of the calendar. You'll have 2 weeks starting Monday after I distribute the prompts. The prompts are going to have to do with this philosophy of religion material. You're basically going to get a choice of 2 choices, which topic you'd like to write on. And depending on which one you pick, you'll be comparing and contrasting different arguments for God's existence. One option is cosmological and design argument. The other one is ontological argument and Pascal's wager. So Pascal's wager and the design argument, those 2 pieces are going to cover this week. By Monday, then, you'll have all the notes that you might want. There could be some stuff that's discussed next week that you could bring into your essay as well, but you got plenty of time to work on it. So just a heads up, not to worry really, but next Monday, yes, and we'll discuss the format of the essays. It's pretty straightforward, and that's not anything that you'll have trouble with. So good, yeah, just letting you know, Monday, we'll get talking about that first prompt. I'll distribute it, I guess, over the weekend, and then we'll have a discussion in class on Monday. But anyways, back to this, the argument from design. This is another powerful argument for God's existence. I think of these 3 as kind of the big 3 in Western history, the design argument, the cosmological, and the ontological argument. That's kind of why I think the book chooses to place them at the very beginning as the first 3 topics. But anyway, the argument from design, sometimes today it's called the argument from intelligent design. There's also a more technical name of it that is used by some philosophers, which is the teleological argument. I kind of think if you like things that rhyme or you'd like to have the kind of continuous theme, that makes it sound similar to the other 2 arguments, ontological, cosmological, teleological. But simply stated, it's the argument from design. Okay, so the version of this argument that we are looking at comes from a British philosopher named William Paley. William Paley lived from 1743 to 1805. And in 1804, he wrote the essay that we're now going to read. So, close to the end of his life. Paley was an Anglican priest and a utilitarian philosopher. So he was a religious and academic person. He's a priest in the Anglican Church. That's the British Church of Christ. And so he's clearly a believer in God, but he doesn't just want to go off of faith alone. He wants to show you that this can be, he thinks, proven or at least convincingly argued for by reason. So let's go over his argument then, the argument from design. Just some stage setting notes here, the title, author, lifespan, and then the date that he wrote it. Okay. So William Paley. Once again, this author chooses to start his discussion with the statement of a hypothetical scenario. And so, like I've said before, hypothetical scenarios are a common part of philosophical writing. And so here's yet another one. Ironically, just by coincidence, it once again involves the imagined setting of walking around in the woods. So just now suppose that you're walking in such a place and you come across, now we're using a different example, not a sphere, but a watch, like the watch that's on my wrist here. So you just find a watch sitting on the forest floor, okay? Now, what is something that you would know for a fact about how this came into the universe? What is something that's obvious to everybody in terms of how did a watch exist? Like you know, and I know that there's only one way for a watch to form and to exist in this universe, and that is what ultimate cause? What has to be the cause of a watch? Yeah, good, Noah. Some watchmaker built a watch. There had to be an intelligent being that creates this watch. Isn't that obvious? There's no way, in other words, for the watch to just originate from randomness. It couldn't have happened through chance. It couldn't just be that, forces of nature produced the watch. Like the weather throws out a hurricane and a bunch of dust and silica just get kicked up into the atmosphere. A lightning bolt hits them and just randomly a watch is the result lying there on the forest floor. There's no way that could happen. I hope we can all be on that same page. And that's what he says to start. He says, looking at a watch there on the forest floor, you already know this watch had to have come from some intelligent being that crafted the watch. So let's add to the next point of this discussion. Why is it obvious, though? What makes it obvious to you that the watch had to have a maker? What kind of things or qualities of the watch make this an obvious fact to you, to your mind, to your judgment? Knowing that this watch has a maker, where is your knowledge coming from? What do you think? Like, how do you know that it didn't just happen randomly? Like, what makes it so obvious that it had to have an intentional act of a creator behind it? Let me see if you have anything to say about that. So the question, just to be clear, is why is it clear? Why do you know that it had a maker? Like, what's the reason that that's obvious to you? I know you might be thinking because it's a watch, but go a little deeper than that. Like, what is it about it, descriptively, that gives you this clear insight? Too sophisticated. All right, good, Finn. That's right. It has many parts within the watch. That's also good. Brian, you say doesn't exist in nature. I get that, but maybe we can't use that point because ultimately he's going to build a bridge from the example here to nature. So that would not help his argument, but I get what you're saying. It's more along the lines of what some of these others have said here, that the watch has such a sophisticated assembly of parts, right? It's so carefully arranged in order to produce the function of telling time. So it seems like no random set of events could have possibly led to a timepiece, right? It takes a mind and an intentional creator thinking, I want to build a timepiece and I want to assemble all the parts using these raw materials so that I can construct something that actually performs a function of time telling. So a principle is generated from this example, okay? There's a takeaway, there's like a little, you could say, moral of the story that he takes away from it. And that's this principle that if something has a purpose or function or a complex assembly of parts, then it had to have an intelligent creator. Okay. Okay, so this first example that he offers is to illustrate and justify this concept or this principle here. That if there's something which has a purpose or function and a complex assembly of parts, then that must have been created by an intelligent designer. And the watch is that kind of thing, you know, like the watch tells time, all the little parts of it have to be just so carefully arranged and ordered so that it can do this. And that's what makes it clear and obvious that the thing that you're looking at has come from some intelligent creator, in this case, a human. So let me read his words and you'll see his way of putting that. He says, keep in mind it's 1804, so his language is a little old-fashioned, but he says, in crossing a heath, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone, and I was asked how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that for all I know, to the contrary, it's been there forever. Would it perhaps be easy to show the absurdity of this answer? So he starts with the stone because the stone doesn't do anything, it has no purpose or function. So he says, if it's a stone, who knows, maybe that's been there forever, but suppose I had found a watch upon the ground, and it was asked how the watch happened to be in that place. I would hardly think of the answer that I gave before, that for all I know, the watch might have been there forever. Yet why wouldn't this answer work for the watch as it would for the stone? Well, for this reason and for none other, namely that when we come to inspect the watch, we perceive what we couldn't see in the stone, that its several parts are framed and adjusted and put together for a purpose, that they are so formed and adjusted as to produce motion, and that motion so regulated as to point out the hour of the day, that if the different parts had been differently shaped from what they are, or of a different size from what they are, or placed after any other manner or other order than that which they are placed, either no motion at all would have been carried on in the machine, or none which would have answered the use that is now served by it. And afterwards, he talks a little bit about some of the details of the inner workings of watches, the gears and springs within the actual clock. But the point is just simple, right? That if something like a watch exists, for sure it had to have an intelligent creator behind it because it's too complex, it has a purpose, and the parts have to be just carefully put together. Now, he gives this example of a watch because I guess what, in 1804, that would have been an impressive piece of human technology as an example to give. But if it's 2021, we could use any number of different random examples to make the same point. You know, say that you see just like a cell phone sitting on the forest floor. Well, you would know that the cell phone, because it's capable of, you know, web browsing and using apps and a camera within it, you would know that that kind of thing couldn't just have happened randomly by chance events, that there had to be some kind of intelligent manufacturer behind it. Or, you know, an automobile with an internal combustion engine. You know that something like that can't just happen randomly. There has to be an intelligent being, namely a human being in this case, that creates it. So whether using his own example or different variations on it that we can all imagine, the point he thinks is clear, that if something like a watch or etc. exists with a clear purpose and function and all this internal complexity, then that kind of thing must have had an intelligent creator. Okay, now there's more to say in this argument, but maybe if the wheels of your mind are turning, you can kind of anticipate where he's ultimately headed with this. Because the watch example he's going to use as an analogy to the works of nature, ultimately. And he's going to say, well, you know, in nature, there's all kinds of life forms that have body parts and stuff that are also highly functional and that have all the biological components needed for them to produce their function. So consider like the eye. You know, our eyes have vision. We can see with those. But the complexity and inner workings of the eye far surpass the ability of human beings to create technological items of a similar sophistication. I mean, even a camera or whatever pales in comparison to the value and the detail of the eye itself. So if we thought that the watch had to have a creator because it's just too purposive and complex, then he says we have to say the same thing about items of nature that also have a similar degree or even greater degree of function, purpose, and internal complexity. So whether it's your eyes, ears, nose, wings of a bird, echolocation of a bat or a dolphin, there's all kinds of body parts and aspects of life forms that equip them to survive and thrive within their environments. And so he would say that these can only be explained on the similar hypothesis of an intelligent creator. That's the ultimate upshot of the argument. But I guess I'll go through it a little more slowly when we return on Friday. Okay, everybody. So for now, then, I think we've reached to the end of our meeting time. So have a great one. Enjoy your day, and I guess I'll just see you guys back on Friday then. If you do need anything, as usual, email me anytime, and I'll be happy to help you out. Okay, guys, so are we good? Let me know. Just you can say goodbye or hit the like button. Thanks, everybody. Okay, then until next time, I'll see you then. Bye-bye.